It is the far-off year 2018. Medical research has taken great strides, turning cancer treatment into little more than a routine procedure. But now, a terrifying new virus is on the horizon. Well, the bad part of that prediction came true anyway. Hello everyone, my name is Delicacy, and this is Video Delicacies, where we seek to taste the greatest flavors that old games have to offer. I just played Trauma Center Under the Knife, which was developed and published by Atlus. It was released for the Nintendo DS in 2005. Under the Knife was the first entry in the Trauma Center franchise, which released 5 games over a period of 5 years before abruptly vanishing, never to be seen again. Despite these games being relatively popular, and despite enjoying other Atlus titles at the time, I never played any Trauma Center until now. Though I find it interesting how rare medical dramas are in video games when compared to other media, especially TV, and so I've long been curious about what exactly these games are. I should caution up front that we will be looking at and discussing depictions of surgery in this video. I'll say that I personally can be a little squeamish when it comes to medical stuff, and nothing in this game bothered me. But if you are sensitive to blood, cuts, or needles, then please be wary. Anyway, I played this game on my 3DS, which has been modified to allow me to capture my footage. In Trauma Center Under the Knife, I was given control of a 26-year-old surgeon. Fresh out of residency, he accepted a position in the surgical department of a hospital in the city of Angeles Bay, California. His name was Dr. Derek Stiles. His surname was a reference to the stylus used to guide his hand, and his initials formed the name of the platform on which his game appeared, putting him in such company as Dawn of Sorrow, Dragon Song, and Dearly Stars. Preceding each surgical operation was a briefing screen cleverly presented in the form of the patient's chart. The first person on whom Derek operated had glass embedded in his arm following a motorcycle accident. Each patient in the game was named, though only a handful appeared as characters in the story. And during surgery, they all resembled featureless mannequins filled with organs. The upper screen displayed my score, the number of mistakes that I was allowed to make, and the amount of time that I had remaining. Most operations had a time limit of 5 minutes. Derek's assistant, Mary, would also appear on the upper screen to offer advice. If she said something particularly important, the timer would pause and I would have to manually advance the dialogue before resuming the surgery. The lower screen was a bit overwhelming at first. In the top left was a numeric representation of the patient's vitals. This value would decrease over time, and I would game over upon it reaching 0. There were 10 different instruments lining the sides of the screen, all of which were visible from the start. Mary guided me through this one, beginning by directing me to the suture needle. I first had to select the tool by tapping it with my stylus. I could then stitch up the patient's lacerations by sketching a zigzag pattern. Importantly, it needed to be drawn in one quick motion. I promise that I'm a better seamstress in real life than my performance in this game would suggest. Next, Mary asked me to use forceps to extract the protruding glass shards. Using a dragging motion, I needed to carefully guide them out of the body and onto a tray which appeared from the right whenever needed. The direction that I pulled the glass was significant. If I accidentally slid it deeper into the wound, the patient would take damage. This is an odd instance of the game representing 3D movement on a 2D plane. The next tool was antibiotic gel, which was used for a variety of purposes. Here I was able to use it to erase the minor wounds left behind by the glass. Mary remarked that this gel was a recent invention, part of Trauma Center's near-future setting. There were more glass shards present in the patient's arm, but these ones were not plainly visible, meaning that I needed to go deeper. Before making an incision, I needed to disinfect the area using the same antibiotic gel. I could then employ my trusty scalpel by tracing a line on the screen. Once I had opened up the patient, the view zoomed, revealing 3 additional pieces of glass. I dealt with these as before, and to complete the operation, I closed up the cut that I had made. The final tool introduced in this operation was the fixing tape. I simply needed to draw a line across the incision to bandage it up. Upon completing this, Mary audibly offered her congratulations. Yes, audibly, this DS game contained voice acting.
Let's begin, Doctor. Doctor! Good job, Dr. Stiles.
The second surgery had me removing a tumor from a patient's stomach. I started with a laparotomy, in other words, creating an opening in the abdomen. I disinfected the area and made my incision. The interior of these bodies looked really cool. I love how the organs were stylized. Before proceeding with the operation, Mary pointed me to the syringe tool. Once I selected it, a bottle appeared in the bottom right. By clicking that and pulling upward, I could fill the syringe with its contents. I could then press and hold anywhere on the patient to inject. In this case, I jabbed him with stabilizer that raised his vitals by 10. Being able to buy extra time by healing the patient like this was huge. Later operations would introduce more specific uses for the syringe, but this healing potion was always available. Since the tumor's location was not immediately apparent, I needed to use the ultrasound tool to detect it. Once I clicked in the tumor's vicinity, I could see a black shadow indicating where I needed to make my next incision. The tumor looked gross. This game's use of color was fantastic. Removing the tumor required me to first shrink it. I did this by emptying it of cytoplasm using the drain tool. This one worked similar to the syringe where I needed to tap and then slide upward to take a drink. Yellow squares then emerged around the tumor. To excise it, I needed to use my scalpel to connect the dots and then use forceps to pull it out. Next, I had to apply a synthetic membrane, which appeared on a tray from the left. I placed the membrane where the tumor had been, slathered it in gel, and then used the hand tool to massage it until it was smooth. I sewed up the patient, disinfected again, and applied a bandage. The third operation was another tumor removal, and it was the first one that Mary didn't walk me through. It was up to me to recall the steps that I had learned and perform them all myself. Fortunately, I had just done the previous mission, so it was fresh in my mind, but it was stressful to be so fully cut loose. This game in general had an incredible feeling of tenseness. The idea of being a surgeon who held people's lives in their hands was scary, and the many pressures that the game placed on the player did a remarkable job of reproducing that. Playing under the knife was a little like playing a rhythm game. Stuff appeared on the screen, and I tapped on it, but instead of the difficulty coming from timing, it arose from remembering which sequence of instruments to use in a given scenario. Completing operations quickly and therefore earning high rankings required memorizing not just which tool I needed at which time, but where on the screen to find it. So I mentioned at the top that this game was developed by Atlus, but I want to take a moment to get a little more specific than that. Under the Knife shared its writer, Shogo Isogai, with Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne. Its design director, Makoto Kitano, and lead designer, Masayoshi Suto, both worked on Demi Kids. And most notably, it shared its producer, Katsura Hashino, with the Digital Devil Saga games. Hashino, of course, later became the director of the Persona series, beginning with Persona 3, which released the following year. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that much of this game's soundtrack was composed by Shoji Meguro and Kenichi Tsuchiya, the lead composer and lead sound director on the Hashino-led Persona games. I thought that the music in Under the Knife was quite solid, especially for an early DS game. So many names associated with the Megami Tensei Mega franchise contributed to Trauma Center that I felt like the only one left out was Jack Frost. I kept half expecting the little mascot to turn up somewhere. Mary was transferring to a different hospital. At her going away party, she was preoccupied with concern that Derek would be helpless without her guidance. Compounding her worries, her replacement, who she was meant to train that day, was late. However, when the new nurse eventually did arrive, she explained that she was only delayed because she had saved someone's life on the way over. It seemed that Derek was in good hands after all. This new assistant was named Angie Thompson. To state the obvious, Angie is cute. Her brightly colored hair and enormous eyes really made her stand out amongst the cast. She had a greater number of voice lines than Mary, though both characters were performed by the prolific Wendy Lee.
Let's begin. Dr. Stiles? Doctor, well done. Good work. Doctor, calm down. Don't do that! What is that? Vitals dropping. Vitals are critical. We're running out of time. Hurry, Doctor! Be careful. You have to be careful. Good work, Doctor. Nice work, Dr. Stiles.
The duo's first patient was a singer whose dreams were under threat by polyps in his trachea. This operation introduced the magnifier tool, which shared the top right slot with the ultrasound that I had used before. Which of the two instruments was available changed contextually. Using the magnifier, I could draw a circle to zoom in on a specific region. To deal with polyps, I first needed to drain excess blood from the area to make them visible. I could then employ a new tool, the laser, to shoot them. In turn, this caused more bleeding, which required more draining and then gel to stopple. Once one cluster of polyps was eliminated, I would need to use the magnifier to zoom back out, and then zoom in on the next problem area. The rock star's voice was saved, but Angie, who took her profession very seriously, seemed frustrated to be paired with such a laid-back surgeon. To make matters worse, Derek didn't show Angie the respect that she deserved. In the following operation, he repeatedly dismissed her concerns. She pointed out that the patient's blood tests were unusual, but he insisted that they go ahead with the operation regardless. She was alarmed as soon as she saw the patient's heavily inflamed intestine, but again he brushed her off. I removed a series of tumors, but the patient's vitals were not improving. Angie insisted that they examine the patient further, but Derek had plans, and so he decided that it could wait until the next morning. But later that night, while he was out on the town, Derek's phone rang. Angie informed him that the patient was in critical condition. He rushed back to learn that a tumor behind the patient's lungs had ruptured. Fortunately, the staff on duty were able to save him, but it was a shocking wake-up call for Dr. Stiles. Distraught, Derek wandered the city streets drenched in rain. It was in this state that he overheard people talking about a grisly car accident. He returned to the hospital once again, where he found Angie trying desperately to resuscitate one of the accident's victims. Demonstrating an uncharacteristic sense of urgency, Derek insisted that they perform surgery immediately. This operation introduced a new mechanic. When a patient suffered cardiac arrest, a rectangle would appear on their chest. I would then need to use the hand tool to massage up and down in time with the moving bar until their heart started beating again. But even once the patient's pulse returned, this was a scary mission because his vitals maxed out at only 30. Every patient I had seen previously had a cap somewhere between 70 and 99. There was a real sense of desperation to this procedure. The patient's heart was a pincushion. On my first try, I removed too many of the glass pieces from it at once without closing the wounds they left behind, and so I saw the game over screen for the first time. I then had to start over from the top, including mashing through the briefing beforehand. On my second go, I was careful to only remove 1 or 2 pieces at a time, using antibiotic gel on the openings and regularly injecting stabilizer to bring the patient's vitals back up to 30. But despite me doing everything right, he was still losing blood. That's when something special happened. Derek saw a star shape appear in his vision. Everything went gray, and time slowed down. I tried stabilizing the patient, but now his vitals wouldn't go above 5. I had to suture the heart, and I had to do it stat. I took a deep breath, and I drew the stitches. And then I did it again because the first time it didn't register. From Angie's perspective, it all happened in under a second. Despite all odds, the patient survived. Angie accepted Derek as a real doctor, and Derek promised to work hard to live up to her expectations. So, I've been referring to the protagonist as Derek Stiles, his name in the version that I played, though it's worth noting that the names in this game were all localized. In the original Japanese version, his name was Kosuke Tsukimori, and Angie's was Ange Tonagawa. Furthermore, the game didn't take place in California, but in Japan. This is a practice that I've never quite understood. To cite a well-known example, I just don't believe that Phoenix Wright would be any less of a beloved character if we had been introduced to him as Ryuichi Naruhodo. And if anything, I think that many of Atlus's other games owe a lot of their popularity to the fact that they take place in what is unambiguously Japan. I have a ton of respect for the people who localize games, and I would certainly prefer we got this version of Trauma Center over not getting it at all. But I personally would have enjoyed the game more if it trusted the audience to empathize with its characters, even though they may live in a different country than us. Robert Hoffman, the hospital's director, summoned Derek to his office. Hoffman believed that the time-bending phenomenon that Derek had experienced was the manifestation of a supernatural ability called the Healing Touch. Doctors with this gift were said to have descended from Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine. He gave a "with great power comes great responsibility" speech, but his conclusion was that Derek should reject his newfound power for the sake of his own happiness. Hoffman, too, had once wielded the Healing Touch, but the pressure became too great, driving him to leave the life of a surgeon behind. He didn't want to see the same happen to his young protege. Concentration had never come easily for Derek, and his father had once taught him to imagine a star when he needed to focus. Now Derek decided to practice that technique. I could activate the Healing Touch by selecting the hand tool twice. The game showed me an outline of a star and had me trace over it. I failed this a couple of times by going too slowly. Once I loosened up and didn't worry so much about accuracy, I was able to get it. The game then took away the on-screen star and had me draw it freehand, which actually made it easier for me. The shape detection was shockingly lenient. Under the Knife was divided into 6 chapters, each of which was further divided into roughly 10 episodes. Since this was a portable game, it was designed around short play sessions. With few exceptions, each episode consisted of at most 1 operation, with lengthier story segments being given their own dedicated episode with a save prompt after. The most difficult operation for me so far occurred in the 4th episode of Chapter 2. I needed to treat aneurysms on a patient's large intestine. These aneurysms would grow gradually over time and eventually rupture if left alone. I could shrink one by injecting it with sedative using the syringe. I then had to act fast before it enlarged again. I needed to cut it out with the scalpel, remove it with the forceps, drain the bleeding, then swap back to the forceps and perform anastomosis, which is to say, manually reconnecting the severed blood vessel. Each time I dealt with one set of aneurysms, more would appear. The last wave had 5 of them. Once per operation, I could activate the healing touch to slow down time for 30 seconds. But even with that power, this proved too much for me. I game over here twice. I was stressed out, but by taking a deep breath and thinking about what I could do differently, I was able to solve the puzzle. You see, I had been trying to deal with aneurysms sequentially when I needed to be working on them in parallel, performing the first couple of steps on each one to get them to a state where they were no longer worsening, and then finishing out the remaining steps once the risk of ruptures had been removed. It was satisfying to finally figure it out. While that operation was memorable for me due to its difficulty, the one 5 episodes later stood out for its narrative importance. Mysteriously, a patient had lacerations on her lung despite no external signs of injury, and each time I healed these wounds, they would quickly reopen. At Angie's suggestion, I tried the ultrasound, which revealed a parasite swimming around under the lung's surface. Once I located the critter, I needed to use the scalpel to bring it into the foreground where I could then strike it directly with the laser. I had to balance fighting these parasites and cleaning up the messes they made, but I eventually beat them all, including a larger boss parasite at the end. I love the little defeats message each one gave. It turned out that the parasite was called GILT, Gangliated Utrophin Immunolatency Toxin. Gangliated Utrophin Immunolatency Toxin was an artificial virus created for the purpose of so-called medical terrorism. Truly, this game is from 2005. Because he successfully treated someone with guilt, something which few other doctors could do, Derek was scouted by a research organization called Caduceus, which specialized in finding cures for diseases once thought incurable. Derek was conflicted about their offer because he liked working face-to-face with patients, even though, according to Angie, he was bad at that part. But he recalled how he felt as a child when a doctor told him that his father's illness was beyond treatment. He was inspired to join Caduceus by the hope that no doctor would have to tell anyone that ever again. So, this game had a remake titled Trauma Center Second Opinion. It was released a little over a year after the original as a launch title for the Wii. I've actually had a copy of it in my collection for years, so I decided to try a taste to see how it compared. In terms of presentation, Second Opinion was a little more polished than the DS version. It had a stylish new UI, the character art was all redrawn, and the soundtrack was newly arranged, resulting in it somehow sounding even more like Persona. The gameplay was less appealing to me though. I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect that the genesis of this series was someone at Atlus brainstorming what sorts of actions could be simulated using a stylus, and realizing that a stylus is kind of like a scalpel. But the Wii Remote is not a scalpel, it's a flashlight. With the loss of tactile feedback and the reorientation from downward to forward, the sense of simulation was drastically diminished. There was a new defibrillator tool that was designed to take advantage of the Wii's motion controls, but it was so finicky that I gave up trying to figure out how to use it. Finally, I should note that Second Opinion did include a new character and some new episodes, but I didn't play deep enough to develop an opinion on those additions. Overall, I can see why someone might prefer the Wii version to the DS one, but my first impression was that I would probably not. Derek began work at Caduceus, the US headquarters of which was conveniently right there in Angeles Bay. Along with the new setting came a colorful new cast of characters, larger than the one at the previous hospital. Though there was one familiar face there. Well, 2 actually. Derek's new boss was the brother of his old boss, but that's not what I mean. Angie transferred to Caduceus. At the end of their first day there, Derek tried to talk to her about her decision, but she was evasive. It seemed that she was hiding something. The 2 of them both had new outfits, and Derek got a new manga-style suiting up sequence that played before each operation. He seemed cooler and more confident here than he had in his earlier role. One of Derek's new coworkers was an old friend from medical school named Tyler. Tyler had joined Caduceus to watch over his younger sister Amy, who had been kept there since being infected with guilt 2 years earlier. He believed that his sister's condition was some sort of karmic retribution for him practicing euthanasia. This game dealt with some pretty loaded subject matter, and I think that there's a lot that could be said about the way that it handled these topics. But to be frank, I'm not interested in attempting to do that here in this video. Amy had a different strain of guilt than the one I had seen before. This one came in pairs. While they were separated, the 2 halves were invulnerable, but when they joined together to attack, they took on the appearance of a tumor and could be treated like one. There were further strains introduced later that also built upon earlier concepts in this way. Amy was infected in both her stomach and her lung, and I had to remove the gilt from both regions within the same 5-minute time limits. Until now, the patient's vitals had been my greatest obstacle, but the timer was becoming dangerous now too. I couldn't simply rely on spamming the stabilizer anymore. After that, Derek attended a symposium with the international branches of Caduceus, but while he was there, the conference center came under threat by Delphi, the terrorist group behind guilt. Derek was accompanied by the anesthesiologist Sybil, who happened to be an ex-cop. That background allowed her to guide him in disarming Delphi's bomb. I loved this one. I thought that using the surgery mechanics in this context was extremely smart. I struggled a little with understanding what I needed to do though, and so I failed this operation 4 times. It never got frustrating though, and once I knew what I was doing, it only took 2 minutes to go through all of the steps. Delphi's offensive didn't stop with the foiled bombing. Richard Anderson, the founder of Caduceus, was among the next to be diagnosed with guilt. His strain seemed too large to remove. To find a solution, Derek was paired with a researcher, the self-proclaimed genius Victor. Anderson told Victor to do whatever tests on him that he wanted. He was willing to die if it meant learning something that could help others. Victor, despite his aloof demeanor, seemed moved by Anderson's nobility. In their first operation together, Victor had Derek test the effects of various combinations of medications and then remove a sample for further study. He then started developing a nanomachine to attack the virus. For some reason, he needed Derek to help out by solving some extremely simple tangram-style puzzles. The idea that a brilliant mind like Victor's couldn't solve these himself was very amusing. I love to see Poindexters like this get humbled. During the operation, I needed to inject Victor's nanomachine into the gilt's moving, barely visible core. Once its outer membrane was sufficiently shrunk, I could then attack the core directly with my laser. But that wasn't good enough. I removed the core, but it was able to simply regenerate a new one. The operation was called off, and it was back to R&D. Derek then solved a couple more puzzles to help Victor invent a laser capable of destroying the core permanently. Anderson's third surgery was a multi-phase boss fight. The guilt fought back by generating multiple smaller cores, and I needed to balance battling them with repairing the different types of wounds that they inflicted. Eventually, I was able to destroy all of the guilt in Anderson's body, but in spite of that, he was still in poor health. Undergoing 3 consecutive operations had taken a toll. Knowing that he had little time left, Anderson called on his old friend Robert Hoffman and asked him to take over as Caduceus's leader. Hoffman had spent years running from responsibility, but he couldn't refuse once his friend reminded him that he had once believed what Derek did, that no one should have to be told that their condition is incurable. Let us now pause to discuss the boxes of Trauma Center Under the Knife. I'll begin with the North American one, as that's the version that I played. I like it. The character art is distinctive, with Derek in the center striking a dynamic pose. I don't think the glow around him was necessary, and I might have gone with a different color for the background, but these are minor complaints. I also really like the logo with the pulse going through the subtitle. The PAL box is the same, so let's move on to Japan, where the game was titled Chou Shittou Caduceus, or Super Surgery Caduceus. This game sold very poorly in Japan compared to overseas, and I can't help but wonder if this boring box had something to do with that. Atlus must have agreed, because when they re-released it as part of their Best collection, they gave it a new cover using a zoomed-in version of the character art from the international boxes. I'm keen on the colors here, but it's extremely unfortunate how Tyler's face got covered by the logo. Let's continue on to the Wii boxes. While the character designs for Under the Knife were drawn by Magoto Ikehata, the rest of the Trauma Center series, including Second Opinion, featured the work of Masayuki Doi. While I believe that Doi is the more technically proficient artist, I do think that there is a certain charm to the original designs that was lost here. The posing and arrangement of the characters is also a lot weaker compared with the DS boxes, though I do think it's cute that there's now a second pulse in the logo. The PAL box uses the same art, but with a different background. I think it reads better at a glance, though I think the way that Derek, who's still glowing by the way, overlaps the red part looks kind of bad. Moving on, I saved the best for last. This is the Japanese Wii version, the title of which could be translated as Caduceus Z, 2 Super Surgeries. The logo design is outstanding, and while it lacks a pulse, one is incorporated very effectively into the middle of the box, resting in the negative space created by Derek's arm. This is a far better pose for him than the other Wii boxes, and I like the focus on Derek and Angie specifically, since I think that those two are more interesting visually than most of the lineup. You can see now where the PAL box got its background, and while it was reduced to a single stripe there, here it forms a cross shape. I'm aware of why they made the change. Improperly using the Red Cross symbol literally violates the Geneva Convention, but the work that it does pulling together this composition is impeccable. I adore this box. Guilt cases began breaking out across the city. Caduceus' surgeons, now including Dr. Hoffman, fanned out to save as many lives as they could. Delphi and Caduceus were at war. This was a bit of a boring stretch. There were a lot of patients to treat, but none of them had backstories, and they were essentially just refights of the guilt that I had seen up to this point. However, things started to get interesting when everyone reconvened that night. In the first face-to-face confrontation between the two groups, a member of Delphi broke into Caduceus' headquarters. Sybil, the anesthesiologist/explosives expert, chased the intruder down, but he got away after infecting her with yet another strain of guilt. This one was worm-shaped. I needed to stun it with the laser, then bisect it with a scalpel. Each half then became its own, smaller worm. Once one had been divided 3 times, it would be small enough to remove using the forceps. Under pressure, I found it difficult to distinguish between the smallest and second to smallest worms, meaning that I would sometimes use the forceps when I needed to use the scalpel and vice versa. It took me 7 total tries, making it the most challenging operation in the entire game for me. While Sybil had failed to stop the trespasser, she had managed to get a photo of his face. Angie was the one to identify him. It was Professor Kenneth Blackwell, her father. Derek and Angie went to Blackwell's lab to confront him. He confessed to having helped create guilt, but when they demanded to know more, he told them that it was too late. He had already infected himself. Guilt's final form resembled a spider. I first had to saw away at the web, but it was corrosive. Breaking even a single strand would put my scalpel on cooldown. Oh yeah, all of the instruments technically had cooldowns in this game, but it only came up when using the same one repeatedly. Since the operations were designed around constantly switching between different tools, it was rarely relevant. The main body would release smaller spiders, which needed to be attacked with the laser, so I was swapping between shooting those and stabilizing Blackwell's vitals anytime that I was waiting for the scalpel to come back online. After all of the webs were destroyed, Victor arrived to deliver a poison to finish the spider off, though I was only able to administer it with Healing Touch active. This was another extremely difficult one, but I beat it on my 6th try. Blackwell lived, and from him Caduceus was able to learn the location of Delphi's headquarters. It was aboard a ship on the high seas. Derek and Angie traveled to this maritime hideout where they discovered that guilt was grown in the bodies of young human subjects who Delphi had abducted. They had deprived these kids of their identities and given them the name Sinner. To save each of the 7 sinners, I needed to do one final operation against each strain of guilt. The viruses were slightly more tenacious this time, but the steps for defeating them were all the same as before. It was a bit anticlimactic that Chapter 6 was essentially just a lengthier version of the boss rush that opened Chapter 5. Though it did feel incredibly satisfying to defeat my old nemesis the Worm on the first try here. Naturally, the last operation was a refight against the Spider Guilt. I did this entire chapter in a single sitting, and my hand was pretty sore by the end. I guess I was gripping the stylus a little too tightly out of stress. I hadn't experienced that particular sensation since taking exams in school. Ultimately, all 7 children survived. Delphi's founder, who went by Adam, was born over a century earlier. Mathematically, he shouldn't have been alive, but his preserved body spoke to Derek and Angie. Adam believed that disease was humanity's punishment for what they did to the environment, and therefore doctors who fought disease were an enemy of nature. Guilt was born from Adam's malice, and seemingly literally from his flesh. With the Healing Touch stuff, this was always sort of a superhero story, so it was fun to have a supervillain revealed here at the end. Completing Trauma Center Under the Knife took me 9 hours and 44 minutes. I had a really good time, but I'm unsure whether I'll play the other games in the series. I'm interested in seeing where this world and these characters go from here, but I'm not exactly champing at the bit for 3 or 4 more playthroughs worth of this gameplay. It was fun, novel, and challenging, but 9 hours felt like the right dosage for me. Though that said, I've listened to the soundtrack to Trauma Center Under the Knife 2, which was co-composed by Manabu Namiki of Black Rock Shooter the Game fame, and it's absolutely incredible. So maybe I should at least play that one? I don't know, to anyone familiar with this series, I would love to hear your opinions. Anyway, if this is your first time catching one of my videos, this is part 16 of an ongoing series in which I rank each game against all of the others that have come before it. Where does Trauma Center Under the Knife belong on this list? Well, while I did like the story in Under the Knife, I suspect that it isn't going to stick with me in quite the same way that Eternal Sonata and Fragile Dreams did. Both of those games were rich with themes and ideas that I enjoyed thinking about long after I had stopped playing them. Now, Elebits, while a very different game, is maybe the closest analog mechanically, but while Under the Knife eventually became repetitive, Elebits never stopped introducing new locations, new creatures, and new music, and so I'd give it the advantage. Star Fox 64's The Final Battle made me feel hopeless, but Under the Knife was probably more difficult than any game on this list, and yet I never experienced any despair while playing it. And so, Trauma Center Under the Knife is my new number 11. Hey, thank you so much for watching my video. I play a lot of cute games for this series, so I hope that this slightly more graphic one didn't turn anyone away. If you stuck around and enjoyed hearing me talk about Trauma Center, I would appreciate it if you would let me know by simply pressing the like button or by leaving a comment before you go. I sincerely appreciate everyone who helps motivate me to continue making videos, but if you'd like to go above and beyond, you can always support me through Patreon, as the incredibly generous folks listed right here have done. The next episode of Video Delicacies is one that I'm extremely excited about, and I hope that you'll look forward to it as well. I'm planning to play Custom Robo V2. The first Custom Robo is one of my favorite games that I've played for this series so far, and everything that I've heard about the sequel has been promising. Until then, I leave you with all of the remaining English voice lines from Trauma Center Under the Knife. Please enjoy.
Ready to go? Derek, good job.
Don't do that!
That worked out.
Okay, let's start. Derek, let's move on. What are you doing? Damn, this is bad. Not half bad.